Chinese President Xi Jinping warning the incoming Trump administration against reigniting a trade war on Tuesday, saying there would be, quote, no winners in the event of escalating tensions. With more on what the ongoing trade dispute means for the industry at large, we want to bring in Gene Seroka. He is a Port of Los Angeles executive director. Gene, it's great to have you back here on set with us. Obviously, very, very timely topic. And I want to bring up a chart that Goldman Sachs actually just put out this morning. And they took a look at imports that we do see from China and what has played out in the past. When you take a look at the past impact of the U.S.-China trade war, and you can see it is the white line there that as tariffs increase, we clearly did see a drop off, maybe to no surprise, of some of those imports. I'm curious what the activity looks like at your port and whether or not you're noticing any trends ahead of the threat of more tariffs under Trump.
Well, good morning, Sean. It's so great to be back with you both on the set. This is real. Going back to 2018, when the first tariffs were put in place on Section 232 and 301 items, we saw big rushes of cargo leading up to milestone implementation dates and then huge drop-offs. Now what we're seeing is a repeat of that. A lot of run-up with the anticipation that something will be done. But we know there's a long way from the campaign trail to the implementation of public policy, and what we need now is a clear line of sight as to where and when this policy may take shape.
And we've got a chart I want to pull up too on your specific imports coming into your port in Los Angeles. And it's been interesting seeing the run up over time, but we haven't seen this huge uptick in the last couple of months following the election of President Trump. There was obviously a run up following May here. I wonder, do you think that that is based on what you're saying, that they're waiting for the actual policy implementation? Or what do you make of the trend that we're seeing?
Well, what we're hearing directly from retailers, manufacturers, footwear importers, and clothiers is that in anticipation of something happening, they are pulling inventory forward. This is real. And we've been at elevated levels all year, Madison. We're up 20% year on year. We'll wind up 2024 with our second best campaign ever in the 117 years, the Port of Los Angeles. But it's underpinned by a strong economy that's lasted a lot longer than some experts would say. And then three geopolitical issues: a dock workers negotiation back here on the East and Gulf Coast, drought conditions in the Panama Canal, which seem to have settled down, but fewer container ships went through because of the loadability purposes, and then the ongoing security issues in the Red Sea with the Houthi rebels, leading to Suez Canal crossings being down by 80 or 90%. All of those issues have pushed more cargo over the West Coast. The front loading started in the third quarter and is a little more pronounced, according to those importers, in Q4.
Talk to me a little bit more about the labor concerns, because one of the sticky points when it comes to the threat of strikes, or what we could see play out on the East Coast that obviously affects you on the West Coast, is that sticky issue when it comes to AI and how, or I guess technology, and how that will then be used here at the ports. How big of an uptick? Are you still seeing an increase in cargo, just given that the fact that that threat hasn't entirely gone away? And I guess what does that indicate just in terms of how those discussions are likely then or could potentially play out?
Yeah, the short-term agreement reached earlier goes through January 15th, and that leaves us 5 days between expiry and inauguration, and then much longer before Senate confirmations take place for cabinet members. So it's kind of an interesting time. The conversation around robotics or automation at ports is real, and it's the most polarizing one in our industry. What we've seen is that robotics can increase capacity at ports and terminals, but we can't leave the worker behind. And that is the crux of this negotiation.
So where do you find the solution on that?
Well, there are models. In Hamburg, Germany, as an example, there's a terminal that doubled its capacity, yet kept the workforce intact, and over time, it's grown. And I think that's where the start of the conversation happens. But what we've seen, mixed results operationally, and with the implementation on the West Coast of automation, we've seen cuts at individual terminals of 50 to 80% of that facility's workforce. We simply, from an economic standpoint, locally and broadly in Southern California, need that good knowledge and workforce on the ground while trying to grow the top line revenue.
How worried are your workers about this?
Very. Absolutely very worried. And they're worried not only for the jobs that are here today, but the skills that are necessary to manage greener technology and robotics, and for the next generations of workers that come into this industry.
So how does that shape your approach, just in terms of the discussions that you, of course, will continue to have with your workers out on the West Coast, how that's shaping some of your strategy then going forward, keeping that in mind. Obviously, though, you need to cut costs. You need to be as efficient as possible. So it is somewhat of a balancing act of what you're talking about.
It is, and one of the central points of focus is the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles building the nation's first goods movement training campus. So whether it be attract, retain, and bring in some of the younger folks for the next generation of work, or if you're more like my vintage and you need to be upskilled or reskilled, this campus, in part funded by the state of California's line item budget of $110 million, can lead us down that path. Now, it's going to be interesting because we want to train people who are not directly under the Port Authority's employ, but yet we're the first doing this, and we're out there really trying to pull together this community.
So as you look ahead to 2025, then what is your bigger focus? Is it the potential implementation of these expected tariffs, or is it the continued back and forth on the port strike?
You can't just look at one area. I think it's both of them and the geopolitical issues that I mentioned. But for every 4 containers, Madison, that we bring across our docks, we create 1 job. That's the economic benefit that's shared across this broader region that employs 1 in 9 folks, about 1 million people going to work every day with the efforts this port makes. So while we need a little bit of policy clarity coming down the line on tariffs and how we must pivot if more and more cargo migrates to Southeast Asia, we also have to keep in mind what we do to capture these elevated volumes and continue that throughput. On a last note, we moved more cargo between July and October than we did during the surge of the peak. We didn't have 1 ship backed up.
Well, and that says a lot just about efficiency. Gene, real quick, we'd be remiss not to ask you specifically about the holiday season. I'm curious just to get your thoughts or just your perspective, what you have seen, the activity, how that has stacked up. Specifically, I guess it might be hard to tell just in terms of how much of this is getting ahead versus some of the other issues that we've been talking about, but just consumer demand and the shopping. How does that compare to what we've seen in past years, just in terms of where things stand right now?
Yeah. I think inventory levels were in better shape, warehouses were more fluid. And I know it's definitional now, but Black Friday number at about $10.8 billion in sales. The Cyber Monday number eclipsing $13.3 billion in sales. Overall, the retailers are pretty keen. Matt Shea of the National Retail Federation tells me that his membership wants to approach $1 trillion in holiday season sales this year between November and December. I think it's looking good for our retail community.
And it's interesting hearing that growth backdrop continuing in the midst of a slew of headwinds that you very seamlessly laid out for us, Gene. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good to see you both.
Thank you.